Ooh, when I was a kid, my mom used to wake me up at 6 a.m. for school. Now I'm all grown up and nobody wakes me up at ungodly hours anymore. But turns out cavewomen had it way worse. Before the sun peeked over the cliffs, cavewomen were already up. And no, not for a cozy breakfast latte, but by sharpening tools, checking food stores, and clearing animal poop from the cave entrance. Well, turns out sweat wasn't just for hitting the gym. No insulation, no ventilation, just rock walls that trapped heat like a sauna. Even sleeping wasn't a cool experience. Their grocery list was pretty simple: meat, berries, and whatever else they could catch or pick. They did hunt larger animals like mammoths and mastodons, but those were more like their version of chicken nuggets, something they enjoyed occasionally. Most of their meals consisted of smaller game and plant life. And yes, they did have the occasional feast, usually after a successful hunt or a fruitful gathering trip. But their diet wasn't exactly balanced. I mean, they weren't serving up salads and grilled fish. It was more like meat, berries, and anything they could get their hands on. Variety, not so much. But hey, at least they weren't cave cannibals, right? Okay, maybe that last part's debatable. Animal skins, they made great blankets, but they weren't exactly breathable. So our cave-dwelling ancestors, they were sweating 24/7, but here's the twist. Back then, they didn't have fancy gyms or yoga studios, so where did all that extra heat go? Into the clothes they wore, mostly loincloths, but also animal hide shirts and dresses, and you guessed it, jewelry. That's right. Instead of beads and gold chains, they sported necklaces made of shells and stone. Talk about accessorizing. These accessories, they soaked up sweat like a sponge. So instead of breaking a sweat, cave people broke their accessories. Talk about a fashionable way to beat the heat. For our cave-dwelling ancestors, sweating was a full-time gig. See, back in the day, before AC and even before recorded history, life was pretty dang hot. No, not just because of the weather, but because people were always working. Farming, hunting, gathering, crafting, they were always busy. Oh, and also trying not to step in it barefoot. But if I were you, I'd skip the fancy threads too. Loincloths, they were the practical choice. Just a strip of cloth between your legs, easy peasy. Plus, back then, more skin meant more sun protection, and we all know what happens when you do and protect your skin: sunburn. Nobody wants to look like a cooked lobster. So loincloths it was, a fashion-forward choice for a prehistoric world, first on the agenda. I mean, think about it. They could just make a loincloth. Why not go all in and make some cave couture? Well, here's the deal. Making clothes back then wasn't your typical sewing circle kind of activity. It was more like a one-woman production. Each woman was responsible for her own threads, and that meant time. Time for gathering materials, canning hides, sewing it all together. Who has that kind of time, especially when there's a whole herd of woolly mammoths stomping nearby? Fire. If the fire from last night had died, someone had to reignite it with flint, dried grass, and sheer frustration. That someone was often the women, especially older ones or those with kids. Why? Because they were the ones who needed warmth for babies, cooking, or drying animal hides. And trust me, starting a fire without a lighter or a matchbox in freezing wind, that's how prehistoric patience was born. Once fire was set, it was time to prep for the day. Not by picking outfits. Now let's talk caveman fashion faux pas. Cavemen, they roamed around in loincloths, right? But have you ever wondered why? And let's be real, most cavemen probably looked like this. No offense, hairy chest dude, speaking of looking like a cooked lobster. Anybody else feel like they're getting a sunburn just thinking about all that prehistoric sweating? And let's not forget the cave they called home. Caveman diet, more like cave munch diet, right? These guys weren't exactly health nuts. The sun is coming up and the clan is stirring. The men are out hunting and the women are cooking breakfast. If the clan was lucky, there might be some leftover meat from the previous night's dinner, or maybe some nuts or berries. But if not, then one of the women is gonna have to go foraging. And yes, that is before breakfast. Well, maybe not cooking exactly, but they are tending to something over the fire. What's on the menu? It was more like an intense job, which meant that the medical uses of plants were kind of like an underground, actually under rock, sort of grapevine. Bloodletting, which is the practice of taking out blood to treat a medical condition, was popular in many cultures for thousands of years. The thinking was that illnesses were caused by an imbalance of blood, so you had to get rid of some. So a sick person would have their blood drained using leeches or by having their veins cut. Yikes, but over time. This oral tradition created what was essentially the ancient world's medical textbook. Again, the idea was to release evil spirits that were causing a headache or some other pain. To do this, a person would lay on a stone slab while someone else used a tool, usually made of flint, to drill a hole into their head. Sometimes the process was made easier by placing a hot poker on the spot to be drained or drilled. So not only was it painful, it was also super dangerous. The risk of infection was extremely high, as was the risk of dying from, well, anything. A collection of really old wives' tailies that might have saved a life or two. Others were just straight up poisonous. But despite the danger, people kept trying new things. They experimented with powders and potions and whatever else they could concoct because they wanted to survive. They wanted to stay healthy. And sometimes, just sometimes, their efforts worked. These women were out there to find food to keep their families alive. And they needed to know exactly what would keep them alive and what would, well, not keep them alive. Maybe some eggs, maybe some toast. Wait, hold on. This isn't a modern family kitchen. This is a prehistoric camp, and eggs and toast aren't exactly easy to come by. In fact, breakfast wasn't really a set meal at all. Foraging or finding food in the wild was a big part of the prehistoric diet, but it wasn't exactly a leisurely stroll through nature. Berries were a particular challenge because some were good to eat, some were poisonous, and some could cause urgent toilet needs. So cavewomen needed to know the difference. And if that wasn't hard enough, sometimes the plants they needed were hiding underground. Like today's root vegetables, tubers were a good source of carbohydrates, but you had to know how to dig them up. No easy feat when your tools are basically rocks. Still, people did it. And they also stripped bark off trees and pounded it into a kind of bread. So they were basically early herbalists. They weren't just using plants for food. They were using them for medicine too. Prehistoric people used herbs to treat everything from headaches to stomach aches to, well, we don't really know what else because most of the time they didn't write things down. The women who gathered and processed these plants passed their knowledge down orally. And of course there were other treatments, ones that probably hurt a lot more than taking some cough syrup. Trepanation, or drilling a hole into the skull, was also common. There were also risks when it came to treating illnesses with plants. Some helpful herbs had side effects that no one wanted, like hallucinations. Ooh, I hate being a mom. Sometimes I wish I could just strap my babies to my back and go pick wild berries in the forest for hours without having to bring them with me. Today we are going back in time to learn about what childcare was like before there was such a thing as childcare. If a mother needed to go somewhere and bring her baby with her, she would simply strap the infant to her back using an animal hide or plant fiber sling. These slings were also useful for freeing up a mother's hands for things like foraging or gathering wood. If one woman needed to forage for food, another might watch her child, or perhaps several women would take turns tending to the babies while others foraged. In fact, anthropologists studying a group of 2,000-year-old skeletons found that they showed signs of the kinds of injuries you'd expect from someone who spent a lot of time carrying babies, including spinal damage and pelvic floor problems. This suggests that childcare was a community-wide responsibility. Everyone pitched in and did their part. And some anthropologists believe that this close caring may have helped mothers and infants bond with each other. Instead, older children simply observed what their mothers, sisters, aunts, and other female relatives did. They learned by doing and by watching others. Now, this method may sound kind of haphazard, but it actually made a lot of sense. Let's face it, if you were living in a cave, the last thing you needed was another cave person telling you how to do your job. Trial and error was probably a lot more effective, not to mention a lot less bossy. That is, of course, if the mother wasn't too busy to notice. Unlike today, where one person, usually mom, was responsible for taking care of the kids, every member of the community pitched in to help, but I wouldn't trade places with any of them. I'll take modern conveniences like indoor plumbing and disposable diapers any day. How about you? What would you change about childcare now, and what wouldn't you change? Share your thoughts below. And until next time, thanks for watching. If you lived in a cave and your kids were all grown up and out of the cave, that would be great. But if you had small children, life was a lot more difficult. Yes, dirt. Kids these days have no idea how good they've got it. Not only did they not have iPhones or PlayStations, but they also didn't have high chairs or even clothes to sit in. Toddlers would spend their days running around in the buff, which might explain why they threw so many tantrums. Just think about it. If your bottom was constantly filthy, you might get a little cranky too. Luckily for us, anthropologists have studied how our primitive relatives cared for their young, so we don't have to. So let's jump into it. Like those cave women did? Wait, what? What do you mean? Cave women didn't get a break from their kids. They literally strapped them to their backs and went about their daily activities. Hi and welcome to my channel. First things first, there were no strollers or baby carriers back in the day. In fact, according to anthropologist Kristen Hawkes, a mother's back was basically an on-demand buffet for hungry infants who were breastfed anywhere from 10 to 20 times a day. No scheduled feedings, no bottles or formula, just nonstop nursing. And if the mother wasn't already exhausted from the lack of sleep that comes with looking after a newborn, she was likely fatigued from carrying the weight of the baby in the sling. It sounds pretty awful, honestly. Luckily for the baby, though, the sling kept their bottom half free and clear so they could gnaw on sticks, bones, or dirt. That said, anthropological evidence suggests that childcare wasn't just the mother's responsibility. Most likely it was a communal effort. As far as teaching children went, there were no formal lessons, no school bells, and most definitely no report cards. Despite the difficulties of childcare in prehistoric times, it does seem to have been a pretty egalitarian system. Cavewoman is a classic look, but we think her style might have been even better than you expected. Welcome to my channel. Believe it or not, cavewomen had style. Just not Paris Fashion Week style. No tutus, no tiny purses, just practicality with a little bit of flair. And we're here to tell you about it. Clothing was made of animal hides, softened by hours of chewing. Most of the time, women went barefoot. She looks like she's ready for Coachella, right? But she's actually just decked out in fur. Women in Siberia 10,000 years ago wore animal skins and little else. In France, women were a little more dandy. They made clothes and accessories from what they had around them and added their own flair. No fast fashion, no sweatshops, just handmade, one-of-a-kind threads. So next time you're feeling unfashionable, just remember you could have been a cavewoman. At least you'd have been on trend. They favored long flowing dresses made of linen and flax. Archaeologists have even found some pretty stylish hats from this time period. That's a full body bear skin with a wolf tail for good measure. And don't forget the jewelry. She has a necklace made of bear claws or teeth, bracelets made of shell, and a ring on her finger. What do you think of her style? Is it more, I woke up like this, or I spent hours getting ready? Let us know. If they did wear shoes, they were made from animal skins and were more like moccasins than anything else. Yep, some women chewed hides to make them more wearable. Other women scraped, ground, or mashed hides into leather, making clothing that was soft and flexible. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more fun facts. See you later. Fur was sewn together with bone needles and sinew threads. Their outfits had to be weatherproof, comfortable, and allow movement for running, climbing, or sitting by the fire looking intimidating. So there were no zippers, buttons, or even really pockets, just practicality. But this doesn't mean that they weren't fashionable. Women often decorated their clothing with shells, bones, and beads. These weren't just pretty, they showed off a woman's social status, fertility, or clan identity. Some women wore skirts made from animal skins. These could be simple and long or short and fringed. They were usually made from deer, elk, or other large mammals. Animal tails sometimes replaced belts. Long necklaces of bear teeth or claws could complete an outfit. This probably wasn't the cutest accessory, but it definitely said, "Don't mess with me." Amusingly, archaeologists have found a clay bust of a woman from 2500 BCE with one earring that says, well, you can't unsee it. Headwear was also popular. Women might have worn flower crowns before it was trendy. They also wore practical hats made from animal skin to cover up from the sun or keep warm in the winter. Some headdresses were elaborate, showing a woman's status in her community. A rare headdress was decorated with eagle feathers, which signified bravery, power, and freedom. A necklace made of bear claws or teeth would have intimidated anyone who dared approach her. Now that's fierce. Footwear was simple. Now take a look at this. What do you think she's wearing? Give us your best guess in the comments. We'll wait. Depending on where they lived, cave women had different styles. The truth is, these ladies were the OGs of style. Thanks for watching. While men went out to hunt mammoths and other big game, and let's be honest, they often failed, women were the backbone of the food system. They gathered up to 70 to 80% of the food supply. That's right. As gatherers is that it gives the impression that hunting was more important for acquiring food. And yes, a successful hunt could feed everyone for days. They know how to find water deep in the ground and how to identify edible plants in the area. These are crucial skills for survival in such a harsh environment. Archaeological evidence also backs up the importance of gathering. These were just the tasks that were assigned based on what was best for the group. Anthropologist Richard Borchet-Lee suggests that the idea of the male as hunter and the female as gatherer may have originated with the European Romantic writers of the late 19th century, but the women accompany them and collect the eggs of any birds they scare up. When the men shoot a porcupine, the women process it. While the meat is still warm, they remove the quills, pluck the feathers, and clean the skin. They scrape off the excess fat and cut the meat into strips for the men to take back to the village. It gained traction as an illustration of the supposed innate biological differences between men and women, but the reality was more complicated. So the next time you hear someone waxing poetic about the noble savage, the rugged individualist who lives off the land by hunting big game, remember that half of humanity is needed to gather the food and keep everyone alive. Men and women both likely did what they could to help ensure the group's survival. In many places around the world, the oldest evidence of plant use by hominins predates the use of animal products by thousands of years. In some cases, the oldest animal bones we find show clear evidence of butchery, suggesting that our ancestors likely scavenged rather than hunted. Although the men usually accompany the women on these trips, the women are the ones who do the actual work. Both men and women participate in both activities, although men tend to spend more time hunting and women tend to spend more time gathering. Still, it's not uncommon for women to bring back more food than men do, but there's no guarantee that the hunt would be successful every time. Meanwhile, gathering was more reliable. Archaeologists have found projectile points, knives, and bone awls in graves of women, indicating that they were skilled hunters. If a woman was injured or sick, it was up to the other women in the group to make sure she was taken care of. Women were also responsible for teaching children critical survival skills and ensuring the group had a place to sleep at night. And even in societies where this was the case, it doesn't mean that one was more important than the other. Both hunting and gathering were essential for the survival of our ancestors, and both required a deep knowledge of the natural world. Women could count on the plants in the territory to provide sustenance. Your favorite paleo diet influencers owe it all to cavewomen. Their days involved collecting seeds, nuts, fruits, insects, yummy protein, and small critters. Women knew the land intimately, which plants bloomed when, which animals laid eggs where, and where water was hiding in dry seasons. This wasn't just a walk in the woods. It was highly skilled labor. And if they brought home nothing, the family went hungry. No pressure. Hi, everyone. Welcome to this channel. Now, I don't mean to stereotype our hunter-gatherer sisters and brothers. Men also gathered and women also hunted. But studies show that on average, women spent more time and energy gathering than men did, and men spent more time and energy hunting than women did. The problem with the common narrative of men as mighty hunters and women, take the Jahonsi women in the Kalahari Desert as an example, and while men went off to hunt, women had other important tasks to take care of. To be fair, our hunter-gatherer ancestors didn't have the concept of gender roles. The idea that men were the primary providers is a relatively recent invention. For example, the Hadza of northern Tanzania are a group of hunter-gatherers who rely on both hunting and gathering for food. In the Kungsan, a related group, the men hunt with bows and arrows. Among the Agda of the Philippines, the women forage for wild rice in swampy areas near their villages. In the Lake of Paraguay, hunting is considered women's work. Among the Inuit of the Arctic, hunting is a man's job, but the women process the meat and distribute it to the community. So while there were some societies where women primarily gathered and men primarily hunted, this was not a universal pattern. Women's intimate knowledge of the plants in their territory made them vital to their group's survival. Thanks for watching. I know what you're thinking. Women back in the day just stayed home, right? Well, not exactly. Turns out cavewomen were kind of like you and me, busy defending their home base from all kinds of threats. It's time for a history hot tip. Hi, I'm here. Well, many archaeological sites have uncovered the remains of women with healed fractures and battle wounds. These findings suggest that women weren't just sitting around making soup. They were out there fighting for their survival. Hi, I'm here. And welcome to this channel where we bring you the stories that will make you say, I had no idea. When you think of ancient Egyptian women, you might imagine them as handmaidens or perhaps the queen. So what could women do to protect themselves? They had a few options. They could carry knives to defend themselves against attackers, or they could take a more proactive approach. If a woman felt like her husband was getting a little too rough, she could actually take legal action against him. But life wasn't so easy for most women in Egypt. They had to work hard as farmers, craftswomen, or vendors just to survive, and they faced dangers like bandits or even their own husbands. When her husband died and left his kingdom to her and her daughter, the Roman Empire decided to take it back. Not cool. If you want to help us grow, please consider becoming a patron through the link in the description below. And with that said, remember to stay tuned for new episodes every week. So, Boudica led a revolt against the Romans, burning their settlements and killing their people until the whole thing was, well, pretty much in ruins. Today we're talking about how women defended themselves throughout history. But first, let's set the stage. They've been warriors, yes, but also strategists, peacemakers, and survivors. And let's not forget the countless women throughout history whose stories haven't been told. The truth is, women have been kicking, but since the beginning of time. So next time you hear someone say, women back in the day just stayed home, you'll know exactly what to tell them. What do you think life was like 12,000 years ago? While others used their knowledge of their environment or their quick wit. One example is Qing Shi, a Chinese peasant woman who fought back against bandits by leading them into a pre-dug pit. Then she and her family ran away. We see women participating in religious festivals where they reenacted mythical battles. These weren't just games. While other Greek women were expected to be pretty and petite, Spartan women were strong and independent. Well, it had to do with their society's emphasis on military training. Spartan boys were taken from their families at age 7 to live together and train as soldiers. But girls stayed home. They had to keep the home fires burning while the men were off fighting, and they couldn't do that if they were weak. They were often taller than their male counterparts and were known for their athleticism. They were a way for women to bond with each other and to remember their strength and courage in the face of danger. Maybe your mind conjures up images of hunter-gatherers roaming the wilderness in search of food and shelter. Maybe you picture them living in caves, huddled around a fire and wearing animal skins. This may seem accurate since these are common themes in movies and TV shows. But did women really just stay home while men did all the hunting? While it's true that early humans relied heavily on the food that women gathered, men weren't the only ones who hunted. And gathering didn't just mean picking berries. The truth is, life back then was dangerous. Your home base could be attacked by wild animals or rival tribes looking to steal your food, your weapons, or even your women. That means our ancestors, both male and female, had to be tough. So how do we know this? But what kind of weapons did these women use? Spears and stones come to mind, but they may have also used bone daggers. It was about teaching them how to survive in a world that was often hostile. Being tough wasn't optional for them. It was a life skill. And don't think for a second that these were like the plastic toys you got at a birthday party. These were deadly weapons used in close combat situations. In some cases, women would train younger girls in the art of self-defense. But this wasn't just about teaching them how to fight. Now let's fast forward through history. Let's start in Egypt around 3300 BCE. Egyptian law gave men the right to beat their wives and children, and they could even kill them without consequence. Moving forward to Greece in the 800 BCE, and let's not forget the Spartans. Their society was famous for its warriors, but it was the Spartan women who really stood out. But why were they so tough? As we move through history, we see women defending themselves in various ways. Some used weapons, and who could forget the legendary warrior Queen Boudica of the Iceni tribe in Britain? Throughout history, women have been defending themselves and their communities in all kinds of ways. Thank you for watching this episode. And thank you for liking, sharing, and subscribing to this channel. When you picture a cave woman, what do you see? A buxom blonde with a club? Maybe a bespectacled brunette with a saber-tooth necklace? Either way, she's probably hunched over as a mom or a gatherer. But did cave women have more going on upstairs than we give them credit for? And today we're diving into the spiritual lives of some very special ladies. The thing is, we tend to think of our hunter-gatherer ancestors as simple. We don't have transcripts of shamanic chants or written records of fertility rites. And there's no force more powerful than the one that helps keep the wolves away at night. Cave women weren't just moms and gatherers. Every purchase you make, every meal you eat, every product you use, it has an impact. That's why it's so important to consider the impact of those things on others and the planet. Many were spiritual leaders, too. They were midwives, herbalists, and keepers of lore, helping their people through the biggest moments in life and death. We have to read what little evidence we have another way. And that's never easy when your library is full of bones. But in Lascaux Cave in France, there's a burial site with a woman's skeleton. She was buried with beads made out of shells, a perforated hammerstone, and animal bones. In another site in Israel, a woman was buried with a collection of gazelle horns. And in Shanidar Cave in Iraq, archaeologists found a female skeleton with over 100 beads made out of marine shells, along with an assortment of animal bones and flowers. None of these offerings have been found near male skeletons in the same caves. So what does it all mean? For one thing, the care taken to bury these women with grave goods suggests that they were important members of their community. Since women were typically the ones giving birth, it makes sense that they would be seen as especially connected to the cycle of life and death. After all, they were literally bringing new life into the world. And in many cultures around the world today, women hold central roles in funerary rituals. It's entirely possible that our cave-dwelling ancestors saw women as especially suited to the role of shaman or priestess because of this connection. If so, these women may have led their communities through fertility rituals to ensure successful harvests, guided souls to the afterlife after death, negotiated with gods or spirits for healing, protection, or vengeance, and kept the community safe from harm. After all, they had no cities, no agriculture, maybe not even much in the way of spoken language. But calling them simple is like calling honey badgers uncomplicated. Sure, they look unassuming on the outside, but they've got a complex social life, fierce independence, and a whole lot of grit. And like honey badgers, they also happen to have a reputation as ferocious fighters. Given that they're often depicted in art holding clubs and wearing necklaces made of teeth. But those depictions are only part of the story. Hi, I'm here to bring you the craziest, weirdest, most wonderful stories from the deep past. The first piece of evidence we can look at to make this argument is the artwork itself. Take this panel at the Cosquer Cave in France. At the center is a large female figure holding up her arms like she's leading a ritual. Around her are smaller human-like figures and animals who appear to be dancing with her. This isn't the only painting where a female figure takes center stage. In fact, there are quite a few examples of cave art depicting women holding up their arms in various poses, sometimes surrounded by animals. These aren't hunting scenes. Instead, they may depict female shamans or priestesses performing ceremonies. There are also many examples of what appear to be spirit guides or animal helpers depicted alongside these women, which suggests a connection to the spiritual realm. So it seems like women were involved in some kind of religious practice. But what exactly were they doing? Our cave-dwelling cousins weren't just fighters, they were also shamans, priestesses, and spiritual leaders. Unfortunately, the specifics of these rituals are lost to time. Being a spiritual leader wasn't a peaceful job. It required bravery, strength, and a connection to powerful forces. Speaking of life and death, every choice we make in life affects someone else. Thanks for watching. See you next time. The first time I heard this fact, I thought, no soap, no toothbrush, not even dry shampoo. How did cavewomen get through the day without showering? Well, it turns out they did shower. Sort of. Hi, I'm here to bring you the most interesting facts about ancient times. Today we're exploring how cavewomen took care of their personal hygiene. The truth is, ancient women didn't have access to modern conveniences like soap or shampoo. But that didn't stop them from keeping themselves clean, so what did they do? What did cavewomen use for pads? Well, they used whatever they had handy. Sometimes that was moss, other times it was animal fur, and sometimes it was nothing at all. It might seem shocking to us now, but these early humans didn't have the same hang-ups that we do today. They were more concerned with survival than with looking and smelling a certain way. They turned to nature for some fragrant solutions. In our next video, we'll be exploring how cavemen took care of their personal hygiene, so be sure to stay tuned. The ancient Greeks believed that body odor could indicate a person's character. They believed that people who smelled bad were angry or depressed, while those who smelled good were happy and optimistic. Talk about a smelly situation. Ancient Egyptians loved to cover themselves in scented oils and flowers to smell sweet and mask any unpleasant odors. They even created perfumes using ingredients like cinnamon, honey, and myrrh. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit that thumbs up button. And if you want to learn more about fascinating topics like this, subscribe to the channel. Until next time, stay curious. For most of human history, body hair was simply a fact of life. And who knows, maybe our cave-dwelling ancestors were rocking the natural look long before it was trendy. The ancient Greeks and Romans also enjoyed scented oils and perfumes, and they even had public baths where people could go to socialize and smell their best. You see, ancient women would often braid their hair and tie it back with the tough fibers of plants like hemp. They also used woven plant fibers to make mats for sitting on while they scratched their itchy bits. Ancient women found ways to take care of their personal hygiene needs. They used materials like wool, linen, and cotton to create makeshift pads and tampons. And they likely developed sustainable practices to ensure that they had supplies when they needed them. From using natural materials to create pads and tampons to using water and sand to clean their bodies, they were resourceful and resilient. While their methods may seem strange to us today, they were effective and sustainable given the resources that they had available. And yes, believe it or not, they used sand to scrub their skin. Sometimes they'd use leaves or ash. We don't have much evidence to go on, but it's possible that they did. After all, they had access to sharp stones and blades made from animal bones, but there's no clear evidence that they did. It's also possible that they simply did unsee underarm hair as something that needed to be removed. And if water was available, they would use that too. But nobody bathed every day because that would have been both freezing and wasteful of precious water. As for lice, well, those were just part of the vibe back then. There was no plastic to shield them from creepy crawlies. But there was a plus side to not bathing every day. Because the dirt and dead skin that accumulated on their bodies acted as a sort of sunscreen, protecting them from the sun's harmful rays. And don't worry, I'll get to the really juicy stuff in a minute. But first, let's talk about something that has been keeping people clean for millennia: water. You may think that showering is a modern invention, but clean water has been used for thousands of years to remove dirt and bacteria. Ancient civilizations built elaborate aqueducts to bring clean water to their cities so that their citizens could wash their hands and stay healthy. The Mayans were particularly fond of a good scrub, and they even created special tools to help them exfoliate their skin. They would use a special stone tool called a picapedra to scrape away dead skin and reveal fresh, clean skin underneath. This may sound painful, but the Mayans believed that this practice helped to improve circulation and promote healthy skin. Plus, they likely felt pretty fresh after a good old scrubbing. As for deodorizing, ancient folks didn't have access to our fancy perfumes or scented candles, but they still wanted to smell nice. Now, for the juicy stuff, menstruation. Speaking of which, despite having limited access to resources, now let's address the elephant in the room. Did cavewomen shave their underarm hair? Today, many people choose to remove their underarm hair for personal or cultural reasons. But it's important to remember that this is a relatively recent phenomenon. So there you have it. Despite the challenges they faced, ancient women found ways to take care of themselves and their hygiene needs. And don't worry, we haven't forgotten about the men. Oh, and here's a bonus fact to keep you going. Thanks for joining us today. I've been thinking about what life must have been like for women who lived in caves. How did they survive? What did their days look like? How did they keep their minds from getting eaten by a saber-toothed tiger? And then it hit me, life as a cavewoman wasn't all that different from life now. Others preparing hides for tools, all the while sharing tales that served as entertainment and education. These weren't your typical bedtime stories. Imagine sitting around a flickering fire with your best friends. They were a way to pass down history, morals, and cultural knowledge from one generation to the next. Think of it as the original educational system. Except instead of textbooks, they had tall tales. The cavewomen's storytelling tradition was more than just entertainment. It was a form of therapy. By sharing their stories and experiences, the women created a sense of community, strengthening their bonds and providing emotional support. It was a safe space where they could express themselves freely, knowing they were surrounded by friends who understood and supported them. Plus, let's not forget about the power of laughter. Sharing funny stories and making each other laugh was a great stress reliever, helping them cope with the tough realities of life in the Stone Age. So next time you find yourself stressed out and in need of a good laugh, remember the cavewomen and their hilarious sense of humor. Just make sure your saber-toothed tiger is safely locked up before you start cracking jokes. The darkness punctuated only by the dancing flames. Oh, and don't forget to like and subscribe. It really helps us grow, and we would love to reach more people with our videos. Also, a special shout out to our supporters whose names you can see on the screen right now. Thank you so much for supporting us. If you would like to see your name on the screen and contribute to the production of fun educational content, join our membership program today. I'll see you next time. You could hear a pin drop or maybe a saber-toothed tiger sneaking up outside the cave. The silence is suddenly broken by one of your friends, perhaps Yuga, who begins to spin a tale. Now picture this. Yuga describes a heroic woman named Torga, a skilled hunter who saved her tribe by bringing down a woolly mammoth. The mammoth, the big hairy elephant-like creature that nearly stepped on our protagonist at the beginning of the story. The tribe cheered after Torga's successful hunt, and the grateful leader's daughter, Ella, became Torga's lover. But their happiness was short-lived because soon a jealous rival named Brug, who had loved Ella for a long time, started plotting revenge. He convinced the tribal elder that Torga was having an affair with Ella, causing a rift between them. On the night of the great feast, Brug confronted Torga, challenging her to a fight. With honor and love at stake, Torga accepted the challenge. Now the fight was fierce, but Torga's determination and skill won the day. Brug lay defeated as Torga emerged victorious, her spirit unbroken. In the end, reason prevailed. The tribal elder apologized to Torga and Brug, realizing the error of his ways, sought forgiveness from Torga, acknowledging her bravery and devotion to the tribe. And so their happy ending came after many adventures, battles, and near-death experiences. They all lived happily ever after. Or maybe she just ran off with her hot caveman lover, and that's all that matters. They were a way of life. Through stories, history was passed down. Warnings of danger were given, morals were taught, and culture was preserved. It was also an opportunity for bonding, for creating lasting connections through shared experiences and laughter. The cavewoman equivalent of a good old gossip session. After the chores were done, the dishes were put away, the laundry was hung up to dry, and the kids were finally tucked into bed. Then came the good stuff. The part of the day we all look forward to, and that's hanging out with your girlfriends, catching up on all the latest gossip, cracking a few jokes, and maybe even roasting a few siblings. Except for the cave ladies, this was their version of Netflix and chill. No screens, just good old-fashioned storytelling. Women gathered by the fire, some weaving baskets, but what did they talk about? Stories like these, full of adventure, action, and maybe a little romance, weren't just for entertainment. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a tribe to lead and a mammoth to slay. Ooh, I can't believe we're still doing this. Let me guess. But that's just plain wrong. Look at these Venus figurines. Those curvy little statues that ancient people made about 35,000 years ago. They show women with big butts and breasts and tiny waists. These figurines suggest that the people who made them valued feminine beauty and fertility. This new information comes from a number of sources, including a 2018 study published in the journal PLOS ONE. It says that throughout prehistory, women were responsible for collecting plants, which provided most of the calories and nutrients for early humans. Men hunted animals, but women gathered more than twice the amount of food that men did. They also collected berries, nuts, seeds, fruits, and other wild foods. This suggests that women had an intimate knowledge of plants and the environment. They are the freaking caveman here. Thanks for watching. They were also responsible for processing the food they gathered, which required different skills and knowledge. For example, women knew which plants were poisonous and how to make them safe to eat. They also knew how to store food properly and how to cook it. This knowledge was essential for the survival of early humans, but it gets even better. Instead, they were probably leaders in their communities. Another study published in the same journal in 2020 found that women played a key role in maintaining social order in their groups. Researchers analyzed the bones of early humans from a site in Spain and found that women had higher levels of stress hormones than men. This suggests that they were under more pressure to keep the peace in their groups. You see, women were responsible for keeping the peace because they were the ones who did most of the work. If they couldn't keep the peace, then their groups would descend into chaos. This pressure to maintain social order likely contributed to the evolution of language and culture. You clicked on this video because you saw the word cavewoman and you thought you knew what you were getting? A powerful mother goddess who was the most important deity in these prehistoric societies, which means that their power was passed down through the mother's line? We usually think of cavemen as having multiple wives, but that probably wasn't the case. Back then, marriage was more of a practical arrangement between two clans than a romantic one. It was a way to form alliances and ensure the safety of both groups. It wasn't uncommon for women to have lovers on the side, but they probably didn't stay with them for very long. In fact, there's evidence that early humans were more likely to stay in relationships that worked out and ditch those that did, kind of like us, not the fathers. This goes against the whole idea that early humans were patriarchal. After all, if you're a guy, you can only pass on your mother's last name. If that's true, then many of these so-called primitive people actually had a pretty advanced understanding of religion. Now, granted, we don't have much written history from this time period, since writing didn't really take off until about 5,000 years ago. But just because these women couldn't write history doesn't mean they didn't make it. And let's be real, for most of human history, women haven't been allowed to be powerful or spiritual. So if there was a time when women were equal or even superior to men, it was probably back in the Stone Age, some hairy beast woman who's always barefoot, has no idea how to drive a car, lives in a cave with her man, does all the housework and has babies every single day while wearing nothing but a fur loincloth. Let me break it to you gently. You're the freaking caveman here, and by the way, that's not how cavewomen looked at all. Sure, some modern people imagine cavewomen as hairy, hunched over and flat-chested like those weird Amazonian women in old Tarzan movies. Some anthropologists now think that these figurines may represent something even bigger. What's more, recent research suggests that many early clans were matrilineal. In short, the picture we usually have of a subservient cavewoman is just completely backwards. In fact, there's evidence that women played key roles in gathering food, managing food supplies, and keeping peace in their groups. And yes, back then, survival depended on everyone pulling their weight, so it's unlikely that women would have been relegated to the sidelines. But wait, there's more. In short, cavewomen weren't some sort of helpless damsels who needed rescuing. They were the freaking backbone of their societies. Oh, and what about marriage? So the next time someone tries to tell you that cave women were some kind of inferior, subservient creatures, just break it to them gently.